Building secure software is of paramount importance in a world that is on an accelerated digitization path. Welcome to the Purple Book Podcast, where we host thought leaders and security practitioners to tackle the monumental challenge of building secure software. Our mission is to spread awareness, challenges, and best practices in secure software development. This show is your guide to hearing inspiring stories of leaders building secure software against odds, and getting to know the personal stories of these leaders who make it all happen. Here are your hosts, the members of the Purple Book community.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Application Security Podcast brought to you by Purple Book. Today, we will discuss reducing friction between development and the security teams. My name is Ayhan. I am the CISO and VP of Information Security at Electra. Today, our guest speaker is Seth. Seth Kirschner is the Application Security Manager for DoubleVerify, which is a globally public traded advertising technology. In his current role, Seth reports to the C-suite and manages everything from secure development to cloud security and also offensive testing as well. Seth also does the career coaching, and he's graduated from the Stevens Institute of Technology. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me this morning.
Thank you. Seth, you know that the keystone of successful business is the cooperation and the communication. Because we know that communication opens the doors between us, consideration allows us to pass through those doors, and the cooperation unites us. Organizations that do not have a security culture established on these principles, they do experience a friction between different groups, such as development teams and the security teams. So, Seth, what can organizations to do to open the communication doors between development and the security teams? What are the kinds of the different ways of doing this?
Great question. And I absolutely agree that without constant communication and open communication channels between individuals, friction can be established, and that creates a lot of disruption, especially when trying to implement security throughout an organization, especially into development life cycles and CI/CD pipelines, et cetera. So one of the main approaches that I would take and that I have taken in my prior organizations is as soon as you bring on your initial application security team, or if that's just an individual to start, it's very important that they constantly meet with all of the development leaders, introduce him or her to those stakeholders within the organization, open up those direct channels of communication and build rapport with those individuals. What that's going to do is ease some of the initial tensions coming in, remind the executives that at the end of the day, you are just a person, and you're not there to halt all sort of business as usual operations in the organization, and that you're there to help them and make everyone be successful. And so by building rapport with those teams and those individuals, you'll start laying the groundwork really well and kick off the program in a way that's beneficial to the organization. But ultimately, one of the areas that you can't think about or can't forget about is really the constant communication. And so once you open up those communication channels, you have to remember to consistently engage with those stakeholders to ensure and remind them that you're there, but then also start building a culture where they start to build trust in their application security team or individuals too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that this communication could be in different kind of just the ways or means, right? Like, for example, kind of just the written communication or verbal communication. And these days we have, just the lots of technological kind of just the channels over there that we can use, right? The kind of just, depending on the development or the security teams kind of just the communication preferences, there are tons of technology kind of just that can help us, right? Or even the kind of just the intranet, because I mean, once we kind of just communicate, the main idea is to relay our kind of just the information to the different stakeholders over there. So what can be done from that area? For example, using the Slack channel or kind of just the channel that the kind of just the teams are already using over there. Do you think that these can be kind of just to bring some, just to the positive impact to the team communication?
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you mentioned, Slack and Teams are a great place to start within an organization to establish those frequent communication channels that can be leveraged by both you and your team to open up those doors and get stakeholders to know what you're doing and why you're there and when you need help from them. So one thing that you can do, and something that I've done in my current employer and prior employers, is opened up one major communication channel. And so that type would be like, in my case for DoubleVerify, like our Slack channel is like DV AppSec, for example. And that allows us, it's an open channel. Developers can come in, product people can come in, anyone can come into that channel and ask our team any questions as it relates to application security or application security related initiatives at the organization, or even general questions about security to our AppSec practitioners and team. And then in addition to that, I've also set up private channels, for example, with each individual major engineering team. It could be based on geographic location. For example, I have teams in like Belarus and Germany and in Israel and India. So like, for example, I'll create those specific Slack channels towards those geographic teams. But in addition, if there's certain products that you want to have a specific Slack channel for, because their product, let's say, uses APIs heavily, or it's a Java-based stack, or some other commonality between these development teams, then you can also bring them together. And I think that starts to understand that there's people in your organization, developers, that although they might be working on very different products, for example, they might be using a similar tech stack, and then therefore, from an application security perspective, then maybe some of the common tricks or techniques or communication to the team might be relevant to other stakeholders, and then therefore they're also cross-informed throughout the various teams that are there. So those are basics that can be done. I think there's a couple other communication channels that can be leveraged as well. So one of the items that I've had a lot of success with is building monthly application security forums. And so what this means is, on a monthly cadence, I get together at least sort of one stakeholder, and in many cases more join, which is managers or senior management or VPs or senior vice presidents across our engineering and development teams. And they'll join the AppSec forum, and essentially I break it down into sort of a high level, maybe 30, 45-minute structure. And a lot of the time it's, what have we done in the last 30 days that we're really proud of? What are we currently working on now that we hope to achieve in the next 30 days? And then what does our timeline look like, and how do we look as opposed to our sort of strategy or plan? So when I joined DV, for example, I laid out sort of a 12-month sort of short-term plan, and then a 36-month long-term plan. And so as every month continues, and as part of this AppSec forum, I remind our stakeholders like where we are according to plan. Have we drifted anywhere? Has there been additional scope added? Have we been able to move forward, for example, if additional resources have been onboarded to the team? And then that allows us to really start making headways into everyone in the organization understanding the communication. Something else that can be done are email distribution lists. And then another great opportunity, for example, is new developer onboarding. So anytime a new engineer or developer joins your organization, have some sort of templated information that can be sent to them, for example, 30 days after they join, letting them know that the application security is part of the organization and that you're there, and that if they ever have questions, that they can come to you for assistance and advice.
Awesome. So I love the idea, kind of just providing regular kind of just the meetings, between these two different kind of just the groups over there, so that they can kind of just see each other's kind of just the perspectives and bring some common problems over there where a solution can be kind of just found as well. This is brilliant. And Seth, some of the organizations also use an incentive tactic as well, right? Can you please tell us your experiences on what type of incentives out there, and it could be useful in enhancing the kind of just the cooperation and the communication, so that these two groups is going to kind of work in harmony?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, to preface that, a lot of organizations now are looking at Security Champions program. I think it's important very important that everyone in your organization to sort of have their own security championship within them, meaning that they should always be thinking about security, and especially in our modern development world, it only takes one developer or one misconfiguration to be a problem. So everyone should be part of the security journey as much as they can. But I think it's equally as important to have scattered champions within each team that are really a main point of liaison, for example, with your security team, and that they're always staying involved, they're staying up to date, you're giving them as much information as they can, and they're also there to help bridge any sort of gaps in communication that may exist when you're only communicating, for example, with managers, or you're only communicating with one particular type of development that's being done, for example, a front and back end. So this way you can have security champions or these like points of liaison across the organization that can help you deliver your messages to their teams in whatever way will be most effective. And then when you have that, you want to be able to incentivize them to be good. I think there's been some discussions in the industry and some points where you might want to say, okay, what are some bad incentives? And then we can go to the good ones. Like some of the bad ones that I've heard is maybe we should tax developers. So for example, if they introduce vulnerabilities into their code, then you dock some money from their pay or something like that. Or if they fix vulnerabilities faster than other developers do, then you give them some sort of monetary incentive to do this. I think that this is like the wrong approach. And the reason being is because at the end of the day, you want your developers to all feel empowered and to make a difference and to be security minded. And ultimately, I think that if you incentivize them for fixing more vulnerabilities, then what they'll do is just find all the low-hanging fruit and then avoid the actual problems that matter. And then I think that if you start docking them for introducing more vulnerabilities, docking their pay, then they'll become disgruntled. And what you want to do is make sure that the rapport that you've built with your developers and the relationship that you have with them is really strong so you can continue making a difference within your organization. So what are some good incentives that you can make in your organization that I think make a difference for both security champions as well as developers or anyone else in your organization to be more AppSec minded? The first one is sort of leadership in competitions. I think competition drives a lot of fun within an organization. And so what you can do is every month sort of stack various teams against each other or various AppSec champions that are working towards an individual goal. Or let's say you're taking sort of like a tiger team approach where it's like, we're going to focus on these 3 vulnerabilities, like for example, in December with Log4j, in January when teams were remediating Log4j for their particular environments, you can make it more of a competition to say like, who can remediate this fastest? And then that will give some sort of incentives to the teams within your organization to work against each other. And then at the end of the period of time, whether that's a month or 3-month quarterly reoccurring call, for example, then you can go on and say, oh, look, our particular team in the West Coast, they did really well. They remediated all their Log4j vulnerabilities in their code within 2 weeks or something like that. And then that will sort of spread throughout the organization and giving them recognition for their hard work and labor. So I think that's one way to do that. And then on top of it, you can add in monetary capabilities to the leaderships, for example. So let's say the team does really well, maybe you can give them some stock grant awards if your company has that available, or some gift cards or something that will make them incentivized to continue to do well at what they do. And then I think that there's also other areas of incentives that you can give them too. So making sure that there's maybe hackathons available in your organization is a really interesting approach, where you can have both developers or even security champions or whoever might want to be involved on deploying, for example, a new type of security initiative at your organization, or helping to set up different types of scan configurations depending on the size of your team and where you are in terms of your AppSec journey and maturity. Different types of incentives could be applicable to you and help your teams.
Awesome. This is very helpful as well, Seth. And we know that I think that the governance is extremely important here, right? Because they set the tone at the very top, and so that the kind of just the secure development activities can take place. And we know that, if you establish that strong governance kind of just sort of capabilities, then you'll be able to kind of just at least eliminate this friction somehow, right? And there are different approaches in establishing these kind of just security governance structure, such as kind of just some organizations apply this from bottom up or top down, or sometimes they kind of just do the hybrid as well, right? From your experiences, can you tell us which approaches is much more kind of just to the effective and why as well, so that kind of just organizations can build this application security program without this friction to kind of just in the organizations?
Absolutely. I think, from a governance perspective, just to set the stage a little bit, it's really important for any sort of AppSec team within your organization to establish some sort of policy that says what can and cannot be done at a very high level, or what should or should not be done at a very high level. So that way there's some sort of set of standard that's been approved in the organization that stakeholders have provided input on, and that's published for anyone to see. And then that way, for example, like hard coding keys, like these are things that you can explicitly state like should not be done, or some sort of a communication like sending keys in Slack channel or things like that shouldn't be done, and other areas of your application security stack. Maybe there's things that are confidential that should only be shared in certain communication channels. And laying this groundwork from a governance structure ahead of time makes it very important. I think the secondary piece is also having some sort of procedure or guideline or runbook in place that talks about roles and responsibilities in the organization. So as a senior executive in the organization, like what are you actually responsible for from an application security program? As a engineer, developer, DevOps, what are you actually responsible for within the AppSec program? And then as a security champion, for example, what are you responsible in the AppSec program? Who's informed, right? Like once you have all this data from your program and what you're doing, like who actually is the receiving end of all this information too? And so having at least a high level roles and responsibilities and sort of basic governance framework in place, I think is a really good starting point. And then how do you actually implement it? And I think this is the more challenging question, where it's a top-down, bottom-up, or hybrid. When you're first joining an organization, in my perspective, it's really helpful to start with a top-down approach. And this is like within your first 90 days, for example. Like if your organization has never had an AppSec program, or because of Log4j and some other recent events, your organization is beginning to think about securing their software supply chain in more details, or enabling their development teams or the DevOps teams in order to provide some similar services to their organization, I think it's important to build really good relationships with the senior executives across the board, and ultimately let them know like what's coming. What do you expect them to be involved with? How much time do they need to commit to this in order to make it a successful program within the organization? And then once you have buy-in and you've established these communication channels with senior executives, and you have C-suite like enabling you to be successful at your job, then I think you can start shifting your mindset a little bit and taking more of a hybrid approach, and then going the bottom up. And so what I always say is that there's like, 80% of your developers, they're going to be like, okay, yeah, security, good. Like I want to become a better developer. So like 20% of them might actually start playing with some security stuff themselves or learning on the side. Then you have like 20% of the development team that they're really not going to want security anywhere. They're going to start pushing back in terms of delaying any sort of their releases, or having additional security checks as part of their pipeline. And these are developers that I think you want to spend the most time with, because you want to make them understand the importance of security, because they're going to be the ones that are going to their friends and saying, oh, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't listen to Seth. Like Seth doesn't know what he's talking about. Seth is not experienced in this type of technology that we're using at our team. And so you really want to start mitigating those naysayers within your organization. And that's why I think it's equally as important to have a bottom-up approach, where it's like, you might not be able to meet with, like, let's say if you have 200 plus, 300 plus, 400 plus developers at your organization, like you might not have a chance to meet with every single one of them. But I think it's a really good initiative to, for example, have some sort of office hours where developers can come in and introduce themselves and say hi and ask questions, and can just pick your brain. And then I think second to that, maybe you can open up some additional communication channels with them that you can provide them games or sort of offline resources or interesting conferences that might be happening in the industry, especially now with a lot more conferences having virtual options, where they can listen in about new types of security techniques, whether it's offensive or defensive, that can sort of gauge their interest and start allowing them to learn a little bit more about different types of attacks or vulnerabilities or misconfigurations that happen within code. And then over a period of time, also roll out sort of development-wide training. And so what you never want is all these developers across your organization, especially if they're lower or entry level, or they just joined and they don't have as much experience. Like, you never want them to come in and not know what application security is at their organization, because in many cases, like, colleges aren't teaching computer scientists about security. They might have a fundamental introduction course, but they never really go into it in details. And so for many of them, it might be brand new. They've never heard about security in code before. They don't know about these different types of vulnerabilities that they could introduce into their code. And so you want to give them as much information and knowledge as possible across your organization. And so office hours is a good approach. You can also do sort of one-off meetings and start just randomly picking some sample size of developers. So let's say, like, every week you talk to 2 different developers just for a half hour, just say hi, introduce yourself. Because what happens is, over time, you'll start building a really nice scatter plot or web of intercommunicated developers that have trust in you and your application security team. They know that they're there, and then over time, it really starts to shift a culture.
Yeah, awesome. This is very useful. And Seth, you know that that is, especially with this DevOps or DevSecOps kind of just the area. Unfortunately, security sometimes is being seen as a kind of just the inhibitor, right? I mean, there's a team there that they are trying to kind of sort of go to the production as fast as possible, and there's another team over there. They are trying to kind of sort of do some due diligence. These DevOps people have a kind of just a shiny button. They press that, and they are in production in a minute. But if security is not there, they are in the news into the second minute as well, right? Because of the kind of just the breaches, data breaches. So what are your kind of just experiences? How the organizations can kind of just the label security as a kind of just the enabler, as opposed to kind of just something that kind of just that slows down the team? How do organizations set the balance between security and kind of just the agility as well?
Absolutely, great question. I think more than ever is this battle there, and I think tools and technologies are emerging to be as friendly as possible, where they provide initial visibility before blocking, for example, or there's teams in organizations that they have a ramp up effect. And so there's plenty of time for an organization to prepare themselves for what's to come. For example, if you do add in a permit to deploy gateway based on a certain criticality of vulnerabilities identified. And I think that there's also a shift due to false positives, for example, that's starting to emerge in the industry. But nonetheless, looking at security as an inhibitor versus an enabler can make a big difference in terms of the culture of the team and how they sit within the organization. And then in addition, do people actually like them? Like, not as a more than a team, but as a human too. And I think that there's 2 different approaches. And I think many organizations, especially Fortune 100 organizations across the globe, or big tech companies and other very large enterprises, they have to juggle this question all the time. They want to have security there that's proactive and that's preventing a lot of true positive misconfigurations or vulnerabilities from being introduced into their environment, or preventing specific third-party and open source code libraries from being leveraged, or looking at potential licensing issues that they have to worry about in their code. And so there's always this constant battle of how early do you want to say no? And then how do you want to be perceived throughout your organization? And so, for example, like what do I think is a really bad approach? For example, where you're an inhibitor in the organization. This is like one of the Tiger Tac teams that's sort of sitting in the back of the closet. No one knows that they exist. And they're scanning for very specific use cases, for example. And what happens is, as the organization grows, this sort of inhibitor team keeps growing as well. And yeah, they probably have a pretty good, true positive percent ratio in some of the SaaS tooling that they may have developed, or some particular configurations. But ultimately, what they're doing is they're stopping people from making production releases by setting up tickets, for example, with their developers, managers, and saying, oh, your developer did something really bad here. This can't go to production. And it may not have all the environment or context there, and it may be stopping potential some R&D that's happening in the organization. And then what you want to make sure is that these teams aren't just in the background with no communication to the organization. Like the last thing you want is your security team to have to be in the background running all this code. But then whenever, for example, a developer comes on board, they're never trained that this team is there. So if they're not made aware of this team that's going to be scanning their code constantly, and that's going to be looking at all of their pull requests or merge requests as they make them throughout the organization, for example, then they're going to start to build some hatred towards that team. They're going to say, who are these people and why are they doing this? Why haven't we learned about it, right? Why is there no information? And I think it goes back to some of the previous points that we discussed today about building really good communication channels, building a well-established governance, gaining stakeholder buy-in, because without these, then security does look like that inhibitor in that organization. And they start to look like the bad guys that are really trying to prevent innovation or deadlines being met, et cetera. And so I think the opposite is true for security as an enabler. In this case, once you have established really good rapport with your stakeholders, once you have built out the communication channels, and once you have defined a high-level governance structure that everyone's aware of, now when a developer comes into the organization, right, they're trained saying, oh, I have all these like OWASP top 10 best practices. I can go here if I want to do my own security training on the side, or here are some examples of injection attacks, for example, like that can happen, and I could actually be held responsible for introducing this. And I know where to go. Oh, if I have a question, let me go to the Slack channel and ask Seth and his team for some information, or let me just send an email to AppSec, for example, and just see if someone can respond to me, because I want to make sure I'm doing this the best way I can. And then after a developer comes on board and they start to realize that all the resources are there for them and that you're trying to help them and you're trying to give them optionality in order to enhance their code, enhance their delivery time, and make sure that you're catching things more shifting left than, after things have been deployed into production, I think that this makes a huge difference. And then that starts to make the organization feel welcome. They're like, wow, security is actually helping me. Right? They're not the ones there hurting me, and they're not the ones saying no and stopping me. I mean, in many times, information security or AppSec or any cyber teams, they need to be in the business of saying no, and that's important sometimes. But I think they alternatively also need to be in the business of understanding how risk fits into the overall business structure and where risk plays a role, and allow the business to accept risk if it is okay. And if there is an opportunity potentially for R&D to proceed forward in what they're doing, you may not need to stop them or slow them down, and leave it to the business to make some of those critical decisions. And so in some cases, as an enabler, I think it's important for an AppSec team to come in and say, this is what should be done, and here are the risks with the way that you're approaching this problem, presenting to them all the options. And then in some cases, it might be a strong enough argument where your AppSec team can say no, but I think the reality is it's better for the business to understand the risk that they've introduced into their system or to their application or to their API or whatever they're working on. And then for them to make the judgment call and say, okay, wow, our AppSec team told us X, Y, and Z. We know that this is going to be very damaging if we go into production, but maybe the sensitivity of the data isn't critical. And maybe that the app logic flaw that was discovered won't really create any sort of havoc in their team. And so rather than going back and fixing this major issue and slowing down the organization and saying, oh, you know, for your next release to come out, you need to fix all 25 of these problems. You could say, you know, fix the most critical 5 or fix the most critical 10. And then the 15, you can put in your backlog. And if time permits, security champions can help work on them, so on and so forth. And so there are certain techniques and strategies that an organization to make the team seem more of like an enabler, and for you to sit there and not just be saying no to everything. And that's a big problem that I think every organization faces now. And I think with more startups emerging every single day, it's really important that new CIOs or CTOs of these startups are building with security in mind from the beginning and not having to play catch up when they go into growth.
Awesome. Seth, thank you very much for your time. We really do appreciate your kind of just the being us and sharing your experiences over there. And thank you everyone for listening to the Purple Book podcast. Have a wonderful day.
Bye everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Purple Book podcast, home of the world's top security leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, find more content from our experts at thepurplebook.club. Remember, it's thepurplebook.club, not .com. Follow us at the Purple Book Community on LinkedIn and Purple Community on Twitter. Until next time, these are your hosts and guests signing off.